today's show, you'll hear investor perspectives on the COVID-19 impact on the future of work. This is Investor Perspectives. I'm the host of Investor Connect, Hall T. Martin, where we connect startups and investors for funding. COVID-19 has changed the landscape for startups, giving us a new normal. We have joining us today Mireya Manigault of Foundation LLC WeDemption, an investor in the future of workspace, talking about the impact. Mireya, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Well, great. Well, we've just gone through the COVID-19 pandemic, and we're in a series phases of reopening and starts and stops is how that's going. But in our last discussion, we talked a lot about the work you were doing in the future of work and wanted to catch up with you on that to learn more about what you see going on there. And so maybe you can tell us a little bit about the work that you're doing in that space right now.
The work that we do at Foundation LLC is to help companies, startups, set a foundation of their corporate culture, because culture sits at the crossroads of everything: productivity, branding, reputation, risk, all of those things. So we help them identify what is unique to their organization culture-wise, and how do they set a really strong foundation that allows people to want to come to work and do their best work.
Well, that's great. So in the COVID-19 world, where we're now coming into a new normal, it appears that it's going to be positive for the future of work in the sense that people can work more remotely, more distributed, and so forth. But what was your take on the impact of COVID-19 on this sector that you're working in?
So COVID-19 is changing everything about work, right? And it doesn't have to be a bad thing, but to have it be something good, there has to be intention behind the design around that. I see some very clear evolutions happening in trust, productivity, the work self, and in corporate culture as a whole.
Well, great. And so inside the world of future of work, we've seen different sectors impacted both positively and negatively. What do you see impacted positively for the future of work from COVID-19?
So everything is a mixed bag. So the positive is really positive, but it makes sense that it would highlight some of the negative pieces. But prior to COVID, and we were still struggling through getting remote work to be a normalized thing across all of the sectors. And then we're being forced to do that, right? So it's good in that it is challenging us to reevaluate what's absolutely necessary for each role. And by that, I mean what's necessary for the employee, for the role, for the company. Is it necessary that this person be in person always? But then that means we have to look at the technologies around remote work, right? And most video conferencing technologies have really stepped up. But there are some, areas that identify some opportunities, like in Zoom. Zoom fatigue is a very real thing. And there are opportunities either in the technology or in how we manage the technology to alleviate some of that. I think there are great opportunities for Zoom and other organizations like products like Google Meet or Blue Jeans or to think about how they employ behavioral science and how they employ the different uses of technologies with computer usage and stuff to eliminate some of the fatigue that's happening.
And so in the future of work area, what do you saw impacted negatively in COVID? You mentioned Zoom fatigue, but what else?
Productivity software, I think, is another one, right? So there's a huge uptick in productivity software. But one of the things you realize in that process is that not everyone, even within the same organization, is using the same productivity software. So it creates an opportunity around how do we standardize those things, but also the productivity software that has been there, that has been designed around certain sectors or within, smaller spaces. How do we get those innovated so they can expand to what's needed now? So let's say COVID is around for the next 2 or 3 years. Everyone is going to need to utilize some of these tools. So how do we make them robust? And how do we make them useful in lots of other sectors?
You say robust. What do you find is the key failing of the current tools? I can appreciate software starts at a very early nascent level and then it grows over time. But what do you see it missing at this point?
So it depends on the software, right? So a lot of productivity software were created. So I think about things like Airtable or Asana or Trello. They were created for specific industries or created out of folks from specific industries. And that automatically creates a bias, right? Not for good or for bad. It just is the nature of humans, right? We design for what we need. But as it's applied to a broader network of people, you start to see where things don't integrate exactly right, or it is a play on Google Docs, which can be really chunky and not super useful. So how do we smooth out some of that stuff so that if everyone's having to use it, it is the most efficient that it can be?
I think you mentioned Zoom fatigue. What's the solution for Zoom fatigue? And on the one hand, I appreciate the fact that I can move from one meeting to the next with maybe 10 seconds of transition, whereas before, when I had to drive from one location to the other, I had an hour transition in some cases. And so I can put more meetings in a day into my schedule. But what does that mean for Zoom fatigue?
Yeah, so I think there's a couple of things. There are things that we automatically will think about and things we'll never think about. Working from a laptop or even like an iPad or something or your phone automatically fatigues your eyes and your body, right? We all know this. And we talk about the challenges around that technology on your eyes and the like now and prior to COVID. But we are asking people to be on it and to be in a space where on a Zoom, I have to pay attention. I have to be looking at this at all times, right? So that's activating that fatigue. But in addition to that, I have to pay attention where in a normal work setting, I would multitask a little, which means I take my eyes away and give automatically, just in that action, gives my eyes a little bit of a rest, gives my person a little bit of rest, gives my brain a little bit of rest. When I'm not the one speaking, I don't have to look at the mic, but that's not what is happening in Zoom meetings. I need to be paying attention and be camera ready at all times. And that's been a struggle for people. So some of the solution, I think, is simply having a few fewer Zoom calls and a few more phone conference calls. And then some of it is there are ways that we can think about optimizing and modifying the technology so that it isn't such a strain on people.
Well, great. Well, outside of Zoom and Asana and those tools, what new applications do you think are going to be coming up to promote the future of work or remote work in general?
Well, so it's interesting. I actually would say some things in another space that is getting a lot of uptick because of what's going on that hasn't in the past, which is areas around diversity, inclusion, belonging, and equity, right? In the technologies in those spaces. And then also around culture, right? Because when you think about people not being in the office together, we have to be really intentional about how we make sure that people maintain community and relationship with their coworkers, right? And as we see all of the unrest that's going on, this is coming into the workplace. Well, I think this is a unique time because people are experiencing two things that we have not experienced in the past at the same time without break. And that is adversity and trauma at the same time. And I think we have historically been really good about expecting people to partition their beings when they come into the work. This is what is appropriate at work and this is what is not. And right now that is all bleeding into the same space. So it becomes the responsibility of work, whether we want to or not, to think about how do we help our folks manage those things? How do we create a space that is ripe for them to feel like they can bring their whole selves to work and also help them to be the most productive that they can be? When I think about Gen X and Gen Z folks and Gen Y folks, like the way of their being is completely different. And that is forcing us to shift to who we are in the office and how we do business.
You mentioned the new applications, that culture was a key issue. How does one put the culture into an application? How do you apply that?
I think that's interesting. So there are technologies like things like Calm is an app that I'm hearing from a lot of my clients and network that folks are using, right? Which is a meditation app and a relaxation app and the like, but they're using it over the course of their workday because they are highly stressed, right? Stressed from all the things we're talking about, the use of technology, but also being on. One of the other uniqueness of what's happening now is that people are spending more time. When you work remotely, people generally spend more time directly in front of the computer, right? So they're less likely to take impromptu or scheduled breaks, right? And so some of these technologies are used to prompt people to remember to take a break, right? They're Apple technologies that, vibrate your wristwatch or ping your phone and say, hey, you haven't gotten up and walked in the past couple of hours. This is being utilized now. So while it seems like that's not around culture, but the idea that we are building into the process things that are very humanistic, right? And centered around ensuring that our folks have what they need holistically is a foundation of the culture within an organization. Companies like Blendor, which is a technology to help figure out what you're looking at in your pipeline and make sure that you are thinking through how you bring folks within your organization and looking at the diversity within your pipeline. Speak to how do we get it in the door? And then there are other technologies to speak to how do we keep it once it's in the door? And then how do we create the best environment? It's even in this mobile world that people are able to succeed.
Great. Well, as we get back into a new normal, but how much more do you think we'll stay in remote work versus going back to the office? What's your prediction there?
I think that'll end up potentially being the next backlash, right? So if we move out of COVID, there's going to be a huge wave of folks that are just excited to get out of the house. But there will also be a large percentage of people that struggle with the idea of getting out into the world again, right? I mean, this is why I'm such a proponent of the flexibility that is possible that we are learning through this forced remote work. As we figure out who we are afterwards, and as we figure out what is absolutely needed in remote work, there's an opportunity for us to, again, think about what is absolutely necessary for this role, for this company, for this employee. I wouldn't be surprised if we get through this and we realize that there is an uptick in agoraphobia, for example, right, where people have been so affected. And is that person not any less productive in their job? Well, no. If the job is set up to be remote, then they're just as productive and we can accommodate those things, right? So I think we're going to be forced to reevaluate even out of this how we imagine work and how we imagine how we interact with each other as employees and employer.
Great. Well, I mean, there's some CEOs that want everyone to come back to the office and work physically together because theoretically they're more creative and they're more communicative and you can do more collaboration type projects. Do you think that's correct, that we have to come together physically in order to be creative and collaborate?
So I think that's like most other questions I'm asked, the answer is always yes and no, right? So there are folks that absolutely need the actual physical interaction to be collaborative and creative. But I think all the companies and all the innovations you're seeing coming out of this COVID situation is happening in a remote world, right? So it's 100% not necessary for that to exist, for people to also be super creative and innovative, right? So again, it has to be with us being flexible enough to figure out what do our people need and how do we accommodate that in this new world.
Great. So when we get back to the new normal, how should investors update their investment thesis for this sector? What should be looking for differently than they did before?
So I love that question. And I always think about throwing away pretty much how we've thought about things in the past. And I mean it literally and also figuratively. It is the world that's coming out of this is changed so much that we have to evaluate what to us may have seemed like completely ridiculous and never would be a successful option in our past world, especially as we think about the future of work, right? If you're investing in the space of the future of work, whether that is in ed tech related to people or in some of these other things that we're talking about, the humanistic technologies that are coming out and also productivity technologies that are coming out, what you would have needed 20 years ago to feel like you could be productive in your job is wholly different than what this generation needs, right? And so we have to set aside evaluating companies based on our experience or what we would need and evaluate companies based on what is happening in the market today and what that will mean later. And for some of that, it will seem uncomfortable. Some of it will seem ridiculous. But I actually think those are potential positive markers for where I should be thinking about investing.
And do you see corporations putting more money into those applications and technologies? And
Absolutely.
By how much?
I absolutely do think so, because I don't think they're going to be productive without those things. And I wouldn't say I would know how much. I think it's going to be interesting to see who comes out of the next few months of COVID and COVID recovery as the leaders. So Zoom certainly came out the gates at the start of this, and they've been able to maintain. But companies like Blue Jeans are coming up behind them because of some frustrations with Zoom. You have other companies like Google Meets and stuff that are trying to also take over that market with their innovations and with their integrations. They're the best at integrations, right? So I think it's important to see how it is moving over the next couple of months, and that will identify the opportunities thereafter. Like post-COVID opportunities will come out of the next few months.
We saw companies like Facebook allow their employees to work from home, but if they left the Bay Area, they would probably get a lower salary out of it. think that's a trend that will carry? That if you want to work in the office, you get paid the full salary. If you want to work from home, you get paid something less because you're not spending as much time commuting, et cetera.
I think that's going to be the delineation, right? And I think employees are going to be in to make choices about where they work based on some of those delineations, right? There is the case for you're not coming into the office, so you're not spending as much money, but there on the other side of that, companies are also benefiting from people not coming to the office financially. So I don't know that there is a viable case to say it should be lower, right? I think it's going to depend. I think as far as I see in the discussions around this, there is an adamant stance amongst employees and technologists, where those contractors are the like, that they should get paid the going rate for the work that they're doing. So I think that's going to be a delineation, and we'll see how that turns out.
Well, it seems like employees, if they have to commute, they would demand a higher salary. Where the threshold is not yet known. But if I were to apply for a job and they said this is from home, that would be one thing. If it was, you must come to work every day and it's a half-hour commute both ways, you start to add the hours up and you start looking for a higher salary out of it at some level. You think that'll become a standard interview question and a standard compensation factor as well?
I think it is going to definitely be an ongoing discussion. But I don't know that when you weigh it out. So recently I had these discussions with a group of employees, employers, startups, and larger companies. And the discussion came to, there's the price that companies pay to have space for people to work in the office, right? And the price that the employee pays to get into the office. And remotely, there is the savings the companies get from employees not being in the office. And there's the savings the employees get from not having to come into the office. But what happened in that conversation was a discussion around markets where it is expensive to work and the value of the service that's provided. So if the average for, say, a full stack developer is X, does it matter to the full stack developer if they're working from, I don't know, Tuscaloosa, or they're working from San Jose? I don't think that's been decided yet. I think there is a win in there somewhere where we come to a happy medium. But I think from a reputational and a cultural perspective, the way it's being handled right now feels bad to employees. It feels thoughtless.
Absolutely. So one of the issues we get into, and we may be, going into another lockdown in the fall if there's a resurgence of the pandemic and so forth, is how do you COVID-proof your business? Do you see a lot of businesses moving today to structure their business so that they can work remote, even if for a short period of time? And you see people making investments there.
I definitely see that. I think there was the mad dash scramble at the beginning of this in March, but I do see companies still thinking through the process of how do we COVID-proof it, and also more broadly thinking through their disaster relief and recovery planning, and also contingency planning, and thinking about contingency planning in a more thorough way. So planning for multiple scenarios, but also planning deeper and broader.
I see a lot of articles that come out about COVID-proofing your business, and one they always bring up is cybersecurity. When all the data is on premise inside a company, that's one structure. But if now everybody's working remote and now your data is now remote, you have to put the protection around the remote worker. Do you see a lot of companies moving to shore that up right now, or do you think they're going to wait to see when something bad happens and then they shore it up, which is kind of the way most companies work today?
Yeah, I think there's a mixed bag. There are those that are thinking through that, but also those that have been so entrenched in trying to just figure out how to move mobilely that they haven't thought through some of those processes. And now they're having to go back through, right? Had companies having to figure out how to send their employees key fobs and other things for them to be able to log on remotely, and other aspects, right? So those things have to be thought out, but also you have to think more broadly, like everyone in my service or supply chain, what are their safety and security stuff? Are they going mobilely too? Does that create additional risk for me? Like having those discussions, which weren't in the past a part of most people's security and BCDR protocols, right? They should have been at a higher level, but they were not in most scrappy organizations. But they today are becoming much more a part of the discussion.
You bring up a good point. COVID-proof is not just if your business can continue to work in a lockdown, but can your customers continue? Because if they aren't buying your product, what's the point? And then can your suppliers continue? If you can't get your supply, how does that work? Do you see that entering into discussions already?
Yes. And something else that has started in the discussions based on things that have happened this week is currencies, right? So my suppliers and my customers, are they in different currencies? Are there issues happening with those currencies that would affect me, would affect my supply chain, would affect my ability to get product out to my customers? And how do I manage those things?
Well, great. That's a good point. So in the last few minutes that we have here, what else should we cover that we haven't?
I think we've covered so much. I would say, I don't know that we need to cover anything else, but I would say just be open, even when it's uncomfortable. Uncomfortable means that there's something awesome getting ready to happen.
It feels like we're coming into a new normal. And like you said, there's the good and there's the not so good. And, the good seems to be that there's going to be a lot more productivity. I get to work from home. I can get my work done in less amount of time. I get the sense, and I don't know if it's official yet, but people talk about moving to 4-day work weeks. It appears we've already moved to 4-day work weeks. I remember my email would slow down and die around 4:30 Friday afternoon. Now it's slowed down and dying around 2:00 Thursday afternoon. So it seems like I missed the memo where we're now on a 4-day work week. What's your take there?
I'm not surprised by that. I wonder if we get to a place where there are fewer stressors and we're still working remotely, will that be true? Probably not. But there's a discussion around a 4-day work week. There's a discussion around like a minimal basic income. Like all of these things are being discussed now and people are trying to move these places. So I think there's a little bit of testing the waters that is happening.
Right. And we didn't get into the insurance issue where if you get your health care from the employer and you're now not employed anymore, what do you do for health care? Maybe we'll save that for the next time, but it seems like the future of work touches so many aspects of our lives, not just the actual productivity side of it, but also the healthcare and the culture side of it. There's many more things we can do, but appreciate you coming on today and looking forward to our next one.
Yeah, no problem. I'm always glad to speak with you.
Thank you for joining us today. As always, be sure to leave a review, subscribe to this podcast, and share it with others. Let's go start up something today. Alti Martin is the director of Investor Connect, which is a 501c3 nonprofit dedicated to the education of investors for early stage funding. All opinions expressed by Hall and podcast guests are solely their own opinions and do not reflect the opinions of Investor Connect. This podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be relied upon for the basis of investment decisions.